Hi, I'm Steve Kulich, past president of the International Academy of Intercultural Research, and it's my great pleasure to join my other president and past president and future president colleagues today to discuss some of the critical junctures and parallel paradigms in cultural research. I've functioned mostly as a historian and also well as a values researcher over the years, but today I want to focus on some of the historical work that we've done over quite a few years now, and supplement the work of my IAIR colleagues. We've done some major studies and publications regarding the parallel histories of IACCP and IAIR. And now that this organization is hitting 50 years, and IAIR, which is a reset of what once was CTAR, and of course the Journal of Intercultural Relations has been going since 1977. We want to look at some of the comparative perspectives and interstices. So this is from a historical, descriptive, and comparative review. And we want to look at some of the culture change that's gone through both of our organizations over this period. This is an ongoing process. Historical research is very complex, and we keep uncovering new resources that we can work with. And we've been working on this in our coursework at Shanghai International Studies since 2002, with our MAs and our PhDs since 2010, and several conferences that we started working on what was the disciplinary resources, history, and status of the field since 2010. That culminated in a 2012 issue that Dan Landis asked us to do on what were some of the pioneers, looking at the biographical perspectives of some of our founders. And then we continued this research with a symposium at an IAR conference in Reno in 2013. And so these are gaps that we want to keep filling and looking at and exploring. We have a very complex prehistory, and it is interdisciplinary. And in the 2020 edition of the Handbook of Intercultural Research, published by Cambridge with Dan Landis and Darren Bavuk, both who've been active in IACCP as well over the years, we looked at some of that shared history from anthropology, people like von Herder talking about the study of culture as a people group and not just biologically. And then the ethnographic uniqueness, basically the emic and emic perspectives, which predated Kenneth Pike, by Adolf Bastian, one of von Herder's students, and various perspectives from psychology, from philosophy, from sociology. And so this history, especially the Columbia anthropological perspective of Franz Boas and his students, and others who applied that then to intercultural education and looking at cultures from a distance. So, we bring together many trends, but of course there's a long tradition in psychology. And that's something that the readings on cross-cultural psychology of IACCP have done very well in profiling. So I'll be working on expanding from this Kulich, Wang Tong, and Dubois paper that we did in the handbook 2 years ago. But we want to just briefly look at the fact that we do have many past critical junctures. When we look at who are the founding fathers, founding mothers, those who've really contributed to the development of the field, we see a lot of common work, whether we're looking at cultures from a cross and comparative perspective, or we're looking at the interactions of cultures from the inter perspective, or now some would even add the trans-cultural perspective. And so IACCP, the history is well documented on the website, and in our past publications, and in the Journal of Cross-Cultural Psychology. You might not be as familiar with some of the IAR precursors. So in the Intercultural Communication Association, so communication scholars, starting with Sitaram, focused on developing an intercultural caucus, and then it became an intercultural direction. And then in speech communication, which then became the National Communications Association, Michael Prosser and others also focused on intercultural and formalized the field at about the same time as IACCP at that 1972 conference in Hong Kong. So these were actually, a year or two before. And David Hoops and his group at the University of Pittsburgh were looking at intercultural education and formed CTAR, and which many of the intercultural scholars from psychology also participated in as a place where practitioners and theorists would work together. And of course, we've just mentioned Dan Landis founding IJIR, which was attached to CTAR from 78 until 98. And then the Academy began. So the Academy now has 25 years, but bringing together all these cross intercultural research approaches, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done beyond a lot of the anthropological history that's been focused on previously. And so, thankful especially to the work of Harry Triandis, to Hofstede and others who really brought psychology into focus. And there's many other trails and parallel tracks that need to be explored. And so we began to look at some of these 4 parallel processes, whether it was speech communication, intercultural education, or the psychology of cross-cultural learning and training, and psychology. And so table 3.4 in that publication, in the handbook, chapter 3, brings out these parallel tracks. And this is just the beginning of the research we want to continue to look at. Some of the really important research questions are, what are the critical junctures of both of our associations? And also, what are the unique spheres? Who are the psychologists who've most advanced cross-cultural psychology and the psychological study of intercultural relations? And, when have they done what types of studies? So one aspect is, of course, the scholars who've been active in both of ours, and we're doing membership list analysis. The second aspect is, what are the research focal points? And for that, we can look at the conference papers that have been presented. And of course, many of them have then been published in JCCP or IJIR. And so citation analysis is giving us insights, as well as interviews with scholars who've been active in both domains and mutually cross-pollinating one another. So this is very, very important. As we look at the present, the past flows into the present. We will continue to focus on people. And so more and more narrative approaches, biographical approaches are bringing out things that we may have overlooked for some of the other studies that we've done in the past. And to see, many of the presidents of IAR have actually incorporated a lot of psychology in their work. So IAR has really benefited from the cross-cultural work, but often then applying it to how people actually interact and the domains of collaboration or of conflict and those types of areas. And publications, I'll look at that in a minute, with the similarity of our 2 flagship journals, and then some of the pioneering and new priorities, especially now that COVID has really caused us to rethink. And then, what we thought was the post-Cold War order, and now some new conflicts with what we see going on in Eastern Europe and various demarcations across the globe. So how do we deal with emerging cultural groups and conflicts? When we look at JCCP and IJR, we see that there are some similar trends. IJR has very similar trajectory of growth of the number of journals, of citations. We can look at the impact factor trends and the overall growth of the impact score for both journals. And, there are ups and downs over the years, but there's a lot of commonality. There are unique topics in both, and that's something we want to do with further citation analysis. And we see that, the SGR scores follow a similar trajectory. IGR is coming up as well. And both journals really have their field and their sphere of furthering the field, and really are seen as not only flagship, but really promoting the study of culture in the unique areas that they both do. So as we look at the future critical junctions, it's very important that we understand the ongoing research agendas. And right now, as we see new areas of culture change and confrontation, how do we look at now, and here we are 20 years into the 21st century, at the psychological intergroup awareness, adaptation, cultural fusion issues, cultural transfer. There's new studies on migration that need to be addressed, and integration, and actually how cultural groups identify themselves more and more uniquely within greater cultural circles. We see continued expanded research on the repertoire of methods. How do we uncover and address novel cultural problems? virtual and real practices. And so online communication is becoming more and more of a focus. And how do we work together as scholars and collaborations worldwide to really represent the globe and understudied populations? And then a lot of specific proposals, of course, since COVID appeared, and what is our ways of looking at how COVID has affected societies. And in some places, some populations may be just seeking to ignore it and get on with life, and others are really still reeling from inequalities or aspects that were not really carefully addressed medically or culturally during this period. So this was a topic of a recent editorial that several in this group, Adam Komisarov joined me and others, to look at how has the COVID pandemic affected our intercultural interactions. And, you know, Rachel Dubois already in the 30s and Alport built his work on reducing social tension and conflict on some of the things that she did with the group conversation method. But how do we look at how social distance and increased isolation have happened in the last 2 years, or new cultural distances and the accusation of strangers or others? So there's been more conservatism and the pointing out of difference than we were hoping to have. We hope that our cross-cultural research would actually inform, and in fact, certain groups have isolated themselves from us. And of course, out of that comes conspiracy theories, a lot of self-protection, social cultural distrust, cultural conflict. So in that essay that we looked at re-examining intercultural research, and of course, this affects the cross-cultural as well, we're really wanting to understand what are the consequences on cultural study that both of our associations can address from our unique vantage points. Rose noted that in country after country, politicians are unable to defend their own records, and so they've tried to deflect attention. So we see new stigmatizing of foreigners or of others. And how do we deal with the lack of connections and connection without cooperation, the need for supporting collective action as scholars? And so, you know, as a true global community of IACCP and IAIR, we really hope we can move forward. Some of the longstanding intercultural communication research issues that we covered in the 2020 handbook, chapter 3, were, you know, these typical topics that we've been working on for many years: cultural attributions, cultural values and beliefs, identities, perception of others, language variations, cultural discourse system, semiotics. Acculturation, of course, is a huge issue and keeps changing as the world keeps changing. Intercultural effectiveness or competence, sensitivity, intergroup conflict. But what about all the new virtual domains that, from online learning, from online meetings, from online interactions, from online conflict of various social media, villainizing others? And so never has the need for our culture research been greater to really explore how do we renegotiate what some see as post-colonial identities and have lived with, and affirming our own cultural heritage to address and overcome post-globalization, fractionalization, and factional feuding within countries, the clash of civilizations or of cultural blocks or of cultural groups within blocks, finding ways to restore harmony, to make new connections, to overcome the contentious great power relations that we're really seeing actualized right now with very tense war situations, and to give hope for post-pandemic reintegration and cross-border collaboration. So these are critical issues, and whether it's the Western NATO versus the East, whether it's revived East-West demarcations or misperceptions, you know, new attention to North and South economic and development inequalities, or contested interactional spheres of the Middle East and Africa, misrepresentations or, you know, overemphasis on Belt and Road initiatives, distrust of expanding digital technologies, whether it's cross, inter, or transcultural psychology and relations. What is the how and why of how we communicate? So this study is ongoing, and we hope that both through the JCCP and IJIR, we can keep publishing on issues of the new levels of interculturality we need, and review our history so that we can have more joint research and cross-fertilization. This is a time for reaffirming our 50 years of shared history and realizing each of our organizations are uniquely positioned, but they do share critical junctures, and we hope to keep exploring these as we move forward with this research engagement for greater competence and cooperation in our world. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to the rest of this conference.